Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We are about to begin the 2044 postseason for the fourth consecutive season. The Pirates are a wild card team after finishing second behind the Cardinals in the NL Central. Was particularly painful this year. We ended up in a flat-footed 97-65 tie with the Cardinals during the regular season after a strong finish to the season for the Pirates. And as you can see, we lost yesterday in a one-game playoff to determine the division winner. So we are going to be hosting a wild card series against Colorado starting in a couple of days. Was particularly painful to lose that one-game playoff to the Cardinals. I honestly didn't think there was still the one-game playoff in baseball. I thought everything was going to be settled by head-to-head, in which case we were 11-8 against the Cardinals this year, so I thought we may have had the division won, but it is what it is at this point. The thing that really hurts about it, though, is that the Cardinals now have home field advantage throughout the National League playoffs with the best record in the National League. We would have been the same. The good for Pittsburgh compared to previous seasons is that at least we're home for the wild card series. We've got the home field advantage against Colorado. You can see we were 7.5 games better than Colorado this past season, so hopefully we can take advantage of being at home and get the W and move on. I feel like this Pirates team has a little bit of something special. We ended up 4th in the league in runs scored and 6th in runs allowed. That's surprising to me. If you were going to tell me we were 6th in something and 4th in the other, I would have bet almost anything that it would have been 6th in runs scored and 4th in pitching. But it was kind of a sloppy year for our starters this year, even though it was kind of the same guys back that we've had for the past few seasons. You can see we got off to a bit of a slow start in March, and then we also were pretty bad in early April. But since mid-April, we have pretty consistently been a winning team. And with some of the additions that we made prior to the trade deadline, our fan interest is pretty much as high as it's ever been. We've been selling out most games, even though we did raise ticket prices from $16 to $20, I believe, mid to late August. So hopefully that'll give us a little bit of extra revenue for these games that we're going to be hosting, and hopefully we'll be able to move on to the NLDS and maybe at some point in the playoffs get some revenge on the Cardinals. Like I said, I feel like this team's got something special. I could be wrong, but we will find out shortly. In taking a look at our proposed playoff roster, I did go back to 12 pitchers and 14 position players, which unfortunately for him meant that the youngster Juan Bin Daoud, who had came up and you can see pitched pretty well with a 3.86 ERA over 32 2/3 innings in September, is not going to make the playoff roster. But after clearing that space, that did allow us to bring Ethan Fox back up from AAA, where he was kind of rehabbing after an injury. And he potentially is going to slide in as our third baseman again with the injury to Alex Palacio. Relatively healthy at this point. We lost Flores to the ruptured MCL a long time ago, so we've been moving on at first base without him. And Palacio did not play well for us after we picked him up in a trade with the Giants. Still would probably prefer to have his bat at third base for us, but it is what it is at this point. Take a look at what Jan Vasquez wants to do with this lineup. And actually, he wants to keep starting Tony Rendon at third base. I'm a little bit surprised by that. Rendon's bat is average-ish. His glove is a little better than average for a third baseman. Ethan Fox, again, doesn't jump off the page in terms of his ratings either. But we'll have Ethan as a utility guy for us in the playoffs, which will be fine, I think. And with the addition of Ethan Fox, that kind of gives us the proposed, if I could show you the right thing, the proposed playoff roster here. We are going to a 4-man rotation. Our manager wanted to keep Omar Gaona, who did have a nice season for us. 11-11 record, 4.52 ERA is our number 5 starter. Manager wanted to keep Gaona in that role. We overrode his view, made sure Gaona is going to come out of the bullpen, give us a third lefty out of the pen, and that meant that Jose Montoya, who was our biggest winner with a 16-9 record, but also the worst ERA, 5.26 out of any of our starters, ended up in the rotation. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't need to override that because the manager was trying to be smart and I am trying to be stupid. The manager, I think, wants to ensure that in this upcoming 3-game series that we potentially give more pitching time to Jose Montoya coming out of the bullpen. But now he doesn't want Gaona in the bullpen, now he wants Gaona to be a specialist. All right, well, we'll let him go. I thought maybe for a second that he had put Gaona in the 4 spot and then Montoya into the bullpen because in a 3-game series, we're really not going to end up using that person. But now that I've taken off force reliever off of Gaona, he still decides he wants Montoya in the 4 hole. So if the series comes down to whether Jose Montoya or Omar Gaona is used in a critical relief situation, it's probably not going quite the way that we want it to anyways. And we are ready to get the series started. We've nursed the fragile Luis Longoria through another season on a 90 pitch count, so we are going to loosen that up a bit. Although his ERA this year ballooned to a 3.72, which is the worst that he's ever been in the majors. He is a really special pitcher, 872 strikeouts and 598 career innings. We've been able to get full seasons from him each of the last 2 years. Granted, he's not going much more than 5 innings a start with that pitch count, but he's still been healthy, earned his first All-Star appearance this past season despite the losing record, and glad to have him on board for Game 1. And turning to Game 1, we're going to have Longoria, who 6-7 record and a 3.72 ERA despite that brilliant stuff. Great movement, 3 excellent pitches, going against Andres Irizarry. Definitely does not look as imposing as Longoria does, but the stats say that they were the same kind of pitcher this year. I'm hoping that we see something differently. And Andres is a 3-time All-Star, so certainly an accomplished pitcher. You can see, not surprisingly, Colorado number 1 in the National League in runs scored, 12th in runs against. We are a little more evenly balanced, finishing 4th in runs scored, 6th in runs against. Hopefully their offense will not be quite as potent playing here in Pittsburgh rather than in the thin air in Colorado. And hopefully our better pitching staff will prove to be an advantage for us. Would love to get the first game with Longoria on the mound. And we lose it 3-2. Rios with the loss in relief, and he's become our closer recently. Ugh, this is brutal. Had a 2-1 lead, and then we gave up single runs in the 8th and 9th to lose. So the season is already on the brink. That's the magic of these 3-game wildcard series. There's not a lot of room for error. Longoria was excellent. 2 hits, 3 walks, 8 strikeouts, 1 earned run. Just a solo home run was all he gave up. Gaona did come on and blew the save. Maybe should have overwrote that again and put Montoya into the bullpen. And then Rios comes on, try to keep things tied, and gives up a run. So Longoria, the player of the game, but a pretty big pivot over those last couple innings in the win probabilities in favor of Colorado. Not much offense. Vinny Tomei and Nelson Ibarra, the only guys with 2 hits. Tomei and Isaiah Hill had our ribbies. And the season is on the brink immediately. And definitely a tougher pitching matchup coming for us with Bobby Gonzalez on the mound. He does not have the same kind of stuff as Longoria or Santana at this point in his career. But he is a proven postseason pitcher at this point. He is a veteran. He's been in the postseason with the Red Sox before he came to us. Obviously been in the postseason with us now on our 5th trip to the postseason with this Pirates team. He's been there every one of those years. So we're going to be losing some minor league coaches, it appears, continuing to scout our minor league system. But the playoff game is really where our attention is. Bobby Gonzalez was 11-7 this year with a 4.41 ERA. As I said, proven pitcher over the course of his career. WAR of over 31, 350 SIERA. Taking a look at his postseason history. 3-3 with a 3.70 ERA. His SIERA is definitely worse. He's actually pitched 3 of the 4 years for us. I'm sure some of those years we got knocked out relatively early in a wild card series, and it didn't get to his spot in the rotation, which has typically been 3rd or 4th. But with the off year that Santana's had, looks like our manager has Gonzalez slotted in at the number 2 starter. And we'll go to Tony Santana tomorrow if we can win this one today. Going up against Cesar Soto, looks like a pretty solid pitcher. 29-year-old, went 15-7 with a 5.05 ERA. 3.25 SIERA, though, so I'm sure that Colorado is part of that. It's a tough matchup for us. I'm just going to check to make sure that we can't override Gonzalez. Yeah, he hasn't pitched in the last 5 days. Santana hasn't either, so we could force Santana into the start today on regular rest if we wanted to. Quite honestly, we're going to need to win with both of these guys regardless, so I don't know how much it matters what the order of operations in their pitching is. And we'll see if we can get a win with Bobby Gonzalez. It's going to be a painful end to the season if we lose a game on the road against the Cubs when we could have clinched the division. Then we lost the 1-game tiebreak with the Cardinals. We've lost game 1 of this series to Colorado at home. It would suck to go out with 4 straight losses. And that's the way it ends for these Pirates. So a quick and painful end to the postseason. As I said, literally just minutes ago at the start of the episode, I thought this could be a special playoff run for these Pirates, and it was not to be the case. Bobby Gonzalez did his job. 2 runs, only 1 earned over 6 innings with 7 strikeouts. Tolka gave up a couple runs, none of them earned. Looks like we had a big error that really cost us, and then Gaona and Rios pitched some scoreless relief. Tony Rendon with the error we had talked about at the beginning of the series. I was thinking about going with Fox at third base, thought that the manager would go with him, but I deferred to his judgment with Rendon. Doesn't mean that Fox wouldn't have made the error in the same spot there, but Definitely feeling that with the things that I've talked about over the last few minutes in terms of Fox versus Rendon at third base, in terms of Gonzalez versus Montoya for a Game 2 starter, and Gonzalez versus Santana for the Game 2 starter, and then Gaona versus Montoya as far as who would be the fourth starter that we didn't use and who would be in the bullpen. All three of those kind of non-decisions that I made and deferred to the manager may have come back to haunt me in various ways, with the error by Rendon today, the run given up by Gaona yesterday, and the uncertainty of knowing maybe we would have gotten a shutout from Santana if he had pitched today. It would have certainly been a different game. So got nobody to blame myself for the disappointing end to this Pirates season. I thought we could do more with this team. I really did. So I feel like I've screwed it up, which is a crappy way to feel on September 26th when you thought you might be playing pretty significant games in October. We've had our best winning percentage with the Cardinals each of the last two seasons. Came the closest to winning our second division title with the team this year. We did win the one division title back in 2039, second year running the team when we made our first playoff appearance. Going to end up making close to $13 million this season with the little boost that we got from the playoffs. I don't know whether that's going to be enough or not to get our budget boosted, which we will find out, but feels like a bitter end to the playoffs for this team. And as usual, we're going to have some big decisions next year because our salary is kind of slated to come in right where we are. And that's going to include a potential raise to about $10 million a year for Luis Longoria if we want to bring him back. It includes Palacio moving on, which is fine. Tomei and Vasquez moving on. All of those are fine. Just brought those guys in to be bats to help us with the push for the playoffs and hopefully in a long playoff run. I'm sure we'll take a hit to fan interest when those guys leave, but we kind of knew that going in. More importantly, our bullpen's going to be taking some big losses potentially with Elijah Helton, Greg Gaylord, and Mario Tolka all potentially moving on. So we're going to open up three big holes in our bullpen with three pretty good pitchers. Helton with a 3.90 ERA this year, brought him back because he's extremely popular, so that'll be another loss. Gaylord was excellent, was our closer for the first half of the season, and then for some reason the manager moved on to Rios, but a 1.29 ERA over 69 and 2/3 innings, and then Tolka with a 2.48 ERA over 54 and a third innings. So we're going to have some holes to fill on this team in the offseason. You can see we've also got team options on Omar Gaona and Ramon Herrera. Didn't think the season was going to end in 2 playoff games at home. So now it's time to start thinking about what this team should look like next season. But before we do that, we'll take a look back at our top performers and sim through the playoffs. And the pitching staff, as we talked about, wasn't as good this year, particularly the starters. Used to kind of having guys with ERAs in the mid to low 3s to the mid to low 4s, and just didn't have that with most of the team this year. We've already talked about Longoria and Gonzalez before their games. Tony Santana was named an All-Star for the third time this year, but coming off of his Cy Young Award last year, definitely regressed 8-13 record. So he went from 20-2 to 8-13. His ERA went up by almost 2 runs a game. His BABIP went up by 50 points. I'm sure that was a big part of it. Also gave up a lot more homers, walked more batters, gave up more hits, obviously, as we know from his BABIP. His WAR was still respectable, but his FIP minus, was nearly at league average levels, and his ERA plus was worse than league average. His Sierra was still sound. The hope is that as a 30-year-old next year, he'll come back and give us more of what we're used to from him. And then we talked about the youngster Montoya, who led us in wins, but that ERA is ugly. The pitching staff was really good. I mentioned Ricky Rios took over as closer, ended up saving 19 games, hit a 2.94 ERA in 70 and a third innings. We've talked about Gaylord and Tolka. Mike Wright and Danny Robles were lefties we brought over in trades last offseason. Both were good out of the pen, although Robles didn't get as much action. Elijah Helton and new addition Ethan Mingo were solid in relief, and then Omar Gaona was our fifth starter. We talked about him already. So the pitching staff, the guys that we're going to have back next year, will be good, but as we talked about, there's potential to lose Tolka, there's potential to lose Gaylord, there's potential to lose Helton. Actually, all those guys are lost at this point. They're going to be free agents. We've got an option year decision to make on Omar Gaona. So what that means is that it may be time to start trying to leverage some of the talent that we have down in AAA, which includes the young starters, Sal Valadez and Bobby Astorga, Felix Bath, who's also a prospect, and could bring up relief pitcher Luis Corona. He's not as much of a prospect as 29 years old, but still could certainly help us. And then we talked about Juan Bin Daoud. So we're probably going to have to move on from several of those relievers, but we do have some reinforcements coming in AAA that will be very cost effective and hopefully close to as effective on the mound as some of those really good veteran relievers that we're probably going to be losing. Turning to our offense, which was the fourth best scoring offense in the league, Nelson Ibarra has not hit as well for us as we hoped since he came over from Texas. 227 average this year, a little more pop in the bat with 22 doubles and 14 homers, put up a 1.2 WAR. Love his defense. Certainly not planning on moving on from him, although his arbitration number is going to start creeping up to 1.3 million this coming year. But with that glove, hopefully we can get a little more offense out of him, but not going to move on, certainly. And then Mario Quiroz, he's got a plus glove, not much of a hitter, hit 218 this year. Possible we move on from him as a backup catcher, but if we have to have him back at the major league minimum, not the end of the world. Vinny Tomei did not hit much when we brought him over. He will likely be gone. Alfredo Velasquez will probably reclaim the first base role that Tomei took. He had a really down year for us with the bat, hit just 189, continues to have excellent power with 18 homers and 301 at-bats. But he doesn't bring much with the glove. If he's not hitting in the 220s or the 240s where he can be a positive influencing offensive player, he doesn't bring a lot to the table, just hitting home runs and batting, on the interstate. So hopefully can get more out of Velasquez next year. Juan Rivera took over as our second baseman, hit just 226 this year. Pretty good overall personality, although he's not a great leader. He's an acceptable defensive second baseman, would certainly prefer a little more range, but not a great player, didn't have a great season. Ethan Fox, certainly in the mix to be our starting third baseman next year after splitting this season between AAA and the majors. Did hit 284 in the majors, not a lot of power, but good personality and a decent profile for a third baseman. Rendon, as we already talked about, ended up as our starting third baseman when we had that injury to Palacio. Hit 225, not a lot of pop either. He's acceptable defensively at the position. He'll be back next year, between Fox and Rendon and Rivera. Would love it if only one of those guys was a starter and the other two were kind of utility infielders. We'll see whether that can work out. Tony Coda, one of the most valuable players on our team, even though the WAR of 2.3 doesn't necessarily show that, but a durable, very good defensive shortstop who just goes out and plays 150 plus games a year. Hit 270 while doing it. Not a lot of power, doesn't walk much, but still a useful player to be able to put in pen into the lineup every day. Turning to the outfielders, Isaiah Hill, despite some ups and downs, ended up with another Isaiah Hill season. 289 batting average, 42 doubles, 40 homers, 120 runs driven in, 147 OPS plus, 139 WRC plus, 5.6 WAR. All-Star for the 6th time in 6 seasons. We'll see if he can pick up a 5th Silver Slugger when we get to the award season. Alex Vasquez hit well when we brought him over from the Angels for the last 2 months of the season. 313 batting average with 13 homers for us and 182 at-bats. We'll likely be taking a hit to fan interest when he moves on, but he did the job for us while he was here when we were trying to get into the playoffs. Arturo Arellano, Rule 5 pick, who was injured part of the season, but we were able to keep him up all year. 251 batting average, 25 doubles, 10 homers. Pretty versatile player defensively. Probably going to be back with us next year and certainly in the mix to be our starting center fielder, which he was by the time we got to the playoffs. Ramon Herrera, getting a little older, not as good defensively. We do have a team option on him for next season, so at the very least would consider bringing him back as a 4th outfielder for us. Still hit well, 283, but only 4 homers and 191 at-bats after hitting 22 and 31 homers the previous seasons. Looks like his home run power may have regressed a little bit, or he just got lucky in those previous years. But feel with Isaiah Hill in left and then some combination of Arellano and Herrera in center, we're probably fine. Alex Ruacho also going to be in the mix. Number 49 prospect in baseball, was the number 4 pick in the draft overall for us in our second draft with this team in 2039. Didn't really hit as well as we would have hoped. I mean, you can see he's still not completely developed, and we had him split the year between AAA and the majors. After hitting 338 in a small sample size in AAA in 2043, he was pretty brutal down there this year, batting just 213. He did hit a competent 257 with us with 9 doubles, 4 homers, and 113 at-bats. So I think there's something here. He's certainly in the mix for center field with Arellano, Herrera, and Ruacho. Some of those guys are probably also in the mix for DH next season. We're set at left with Isaiah Hill, and I think we're set at right with Henry Gonzalez. He followed up his Rookie of the Year season with a fine year, not as good as his Rookie of the Year season. You can see his OPS plus dipped by 17 points. WRC plus dipped by 21 points, but still put up a 4.0 WAR. The 264 batting average doesn't excite us, but the 36 doubles, 20 home runs in 535 at-bats. Competent defensive right fielder. Would want someone a little better there in a perfect world, but guy who draws a ton of walks, 120 walks this year. That's one area where he did improve, although his OBP still declined to 397 with the fact that his batting average was lower and he had a lot more at-bats this year. But a pretty useful player for us who is a all-star 2 times in 2 seasons and, won a wild card game series MVP for us last year when he was Rookie of the Year. So feel like in the outfield we are in good shape, even with the departure of Vasquez. The infield is where we may want to do some work. That seems to have been a common theme over recent years. We've got so many relievers coming back, or we've got so many relievers that we're going to be losing, that what to do with Luis Longoria is not as clear to me. I kind of figured, especially after nursing him through another season with that low pitch count, with his contract now going up to the $10 million range, it might make sense to try to trade him this offseason for some infield help. It still may make sense to do that, but there's also an argument to, since it does seem like we can kind of fit him with where our salaries are at this point and where our budget is, bring him back, supplement the back end of our pitching staff with some of the rookies that we talked about, bringing them up from AAA, and then just look on a shoestring to see if we can find someone to help our infield. You know, that's kind of one path for the offseason. The other path is to trade away Longoria for someone who can be a starting first, second, or third baseman for us, who's, you know, an above average hitter with a pretty good glove, particularly if they end up being our second baseman or third baseman. Those to me are the two paths for this potential offseason. But we'll know more in the coming weeks as we, see how the arbitration numbers all kind of evolve and have some time to think about things a little more also. And to add insult to injury, the Pirates are the only team that got swept in the first round, and we got swept at home. So a disappointing exit to the playoffs, as we talked about. And as we continue to sim through the playoffs, Bobby Gonzalez was named the September Pitcher of the Month in the National League, 4-0 record, 1.73 ERA. So perhaps that explains why our manager wanted to use him as the number 2 starter rather than the number 3 starter in the playoff series. Looking at the playoffs at this point, Detroit has already moved on to the LCS. Going to have a deciding Game 5 between the Red Sox and the Royals. The Mets have already moved on, and the Cardinals have a lead over the Rockies team that took us out at this point. And the playoffs are about as painful as it can get for us when we look at the Final Four. We've got the Cardinals, who have beat us in the division 4 straight years. We've got the Mets, who have taken us out in the playoffs 2 times in the past 4 seasons. We've got our former team, the Kansas City Royals, who are still a juggernaut even 7 years after we left, leveraging some of the farm system that we built there. And then we've got the Detroit Tigers, who we don't really have any connection to. So go Tigers. And the World Series is going to be the Tigers against the Cardinals. Tigers took out the Royals 4-1. Cardinals took out the Mets 4-2. We'll find out shortly who the 2044 World Champions are. And the Detroit Tigers are your 2044 World Series champions. 60 years after their 1984 team got off to that incredible start on their way to a World Series title, the Tigers are World Series champions again. Interesting to look at what they look like as far as a budget situation. Yeah, they're in the top half of the league in budget and payroll. Ton of fan interest, average market size, and loyalty. So they've done a good job there, 4 straight winning seasons, and obviously despite a somewhat pedestrian .531 winning percentage this year, they are the World Series champions. And we should find out what's in store for us now. We're going to need to make a option year decision on Ramon Herrera, as we talked about. He's still in the mix to be the starting center fielder, but I think it's more likely he'll end up in a backup role behind either the youngster Ruacho or the Rule 5 acquisition from last year, both of whom are younger and probably more dynamic. But I tend to think we'll probably bring him back at that level. Also, got to make a decision on our longtime friend, Omar Gaona, who has been with us since the start of this playthrough. Personnel leaving, our team trainer, Ruben Andrade. He was only on a 1-year deal, so that's not a shocker. Ooh, we got a 2-year extension from Old Man Nutting this year. He had us year to year, I think, for 2 straight years. So he gave us a small raise and gave us a 2-year extension. Reviewing those season goals, happy that we delivered a playoff performance. Happy that we brought on Alex Palacio at third base. Still got some work to do on attendance. Happy with our performance. Wants us to improve our defensive efficiency. We want that too. Wants us to increase our attendance. We'll try. He wants us to sign Alex Vasquez. You knew that was going to happen with one of the older guys that we brought on. Yeah, we're not going to be paying a 38-year-old Alex Vasquez $19 million a year unless you gave us a much bigger budget, Mr. Nutting. And wants us to win a championship in the next 3 seasons. So simple goals. Are we going to have any more money to do that? We did get a boost, so that helps a little bit. Got a boost up to $150 million. So for the first time in a few seasons, we're moving in the right direction. That was an $8 million boost. We had really steady progress through our first 4 years. Then we dipped back, held steady last year, and now an $8 million boost. So not the most significant increase, but at least it gives us a little bit to play with. Looking at the salary situation now, still going to have some tough decisions to make, as I talked about. Helton, Gaylord, and Tolka are all free agents. And then the 3 veterans we brought on, Palacio, Tomei, and Vasquez, are all free agents. So would think that there's a better chance we'd keep 1 or 2 of the relievers than there is that we'll go for those aging veterans who are probably going to be pretty expensive. So then I think the big question is what we want to do with Longoria. If he's healthy, he's certainly worth $10 million, and we can kind of afford it. Right now our payroll is kind of coming in right where we were this past season, so that's fine. But we definitely would like to improve our infield, both offensively and defensively. And if we can get a big-time infielder, potentially for Longoria, maybe it makes sense to move on from him and really turn the rotation over to Santana heading things up, Gonzalez, Montoya kind of is our top 3, and then between Bin Daoud, Sal Valadez, Bath, we've got some guys we could try at the back end of the starting rotation. And we obviously can still bring Gaona back, who's been our number 5 starter for the last couple of years. So I think what we do with Longoria, do we bring him back or do we try to flip him for some infield help, is a big decision. What do we do with these relievers that are free agents? We can maybe bring one of them back. And then what do we do to try to improve our infield, as we talked about? I feel like we've got depth in the farm system to bolster the back end of our pitching staff. I'm okay with where we are at catcher, happy with where we are in the outfield. It's just a matter of, can we bring on someone who can be a real difference maker, likely at second base or third base for us, with a good bat and a really good glove. So I think what we need to think about in this upcoming off season is pretty straightforward. If you've got other thoughts, would love to hear them down below. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.